They knew 8 days before that Pearl Harbor was coming. The American people were basically isolationists. They were never going to get into another foreign war. So you had to let nature take its course. After Pearl Harbor, recruited officers were lines formed.
So they could have potentially stopped it.
They could have met them out in the open and drove them back.
And they chose not to.
They chose not to. We were well briefed.
Welcome back to In the Field, a show that celebrates the art of documentary storytelling. You're listening on CBC Radio 1 and Sirius 159. I'm David Gutnick. When you think of spies, likely what springs to mind is the movie version. The dashing international lady killer who foils all those evil forces using high-tech gadgets, a dash of violence, and a whole lot of charm. The name's Bond. James Bond. But the day-to-day lives of real honest-to-goodness spies, well, they're a little different. A few years ago, a World War II spy from Prince Edward Island spoke out and unveiled some of the real stories behind his former job. Clifton Stewart was recruited by the British for his radio operating skills. He was one of several hundred Allied troops trained at a special covert facility in southern Ontario called, wait for it, Camp X. Stewart passed away earlier this month at the age of 91. But not before he shared some of his exploits with the CBC's Laura Chapin. Here is A Man, Most Ordinary.
I was an amateur radio operator at the time, and we were experimenting.
It's late 1939. Germany had invaded Poland that September. 2 RCMP officers knock at Cliff Stewart's door in Charlottetown.
Several amateurs had a license for experimenting in a mode of transmission called carrier shift key. A lot of the communications then was in Morse code, but with carrier shift keying, it could handle information a lot faster because it was just 2 tones. It's just a warble is all you hear. That's carrier shift keying.
And that's what the British wanted, so they could send messages across the Atlantic.
And this was my claim to fame. We could transmit traffic at about 600 words a minute. Pretty nearly got me killed a few times, but it worked.
So Cliff Stewart traded in his mechanic's coveralls where he'd been working at a farm dealership for an army uniform. He agreed to serve the British in their quest to establish a communications network that would send secret messages around the world to try to knock the Nazi march off balance. Cliff's W5 ID gave him powers he never imagined.
I could go to any airport in the States. I was sent to various places and plunk that down at the airport and you got your ticket. And you'd bump anybody. I can remember bumping a U.S. colonel, and I can remember the fit he took when he saw a foreigner take his seat.
Cliff's first flight was to New York, where he went to work in the Rockefeller Center at the secret American headquarters of the British Security Coordination, or BSC. That's where he helped build the encoder and decoder machine called ROC-X.
ROC-X was a piece of equipment where an operator on a standard teletype machine could type a message. It was encoded through a process on a regular 5-unit teletype tape, paper tape at the time. You've probably seen it, ticker tape if you want to call it that. And it would run through a machine at the other end, and it would come back out and type back out in plain English. And it could not be it could be intercepted, but it could not be broken.
It took a machine the size of a refrigerator to send these secure communications between top government officials, people who included Winston Churchill and Franklin Delano Roosevelt.
Even a good dogfight would involve some comments that had to be made to somebody.
Cliff helped build at least 5 more of these machines, one for Bletchley Park Manor, the British communications hub in England just north of London, one for the British Embassy in Washington, a portable machine, and a spare, and one for Camp X, a secret communication and training base near Oshawa, where Cliff eventually ended up.
There was at least 12 acres of fields covered with antennas at camp, and that was supposedly, as far as the natives knew who lived close by, that was the CBC's transatlantic setup, and nobody ever questioned it.
Camp X was a 300-acre abandoned farm on the shores of Lake Ontario. There was a communications base on the top floor of the old farmhouse. Obstacle courses were set up on the ground floor and in the basement to teach agents how to silently infiltrate a building, day or night. There was a barracks and an officer's mess, and it was all surrounded by barbed wire, patrolled 24 hours a day. Even so, agents had to be careful.
When you went to Camp X, you either landed at Union, if you went by train at Union Station or the airport, Malton, and you usually changed cars once anyway, perhaps twice, on the way out.
And was anybody ever followed?
Yes, there was German agents here at the time. We got most of them, but I wouldn't say we got them all.
So you didn't drive directly. You switched cars in a dark street somewhere. And if you thought you were being followed, you didn't go.
It was well organized. There's a picture. Now that's a group after we had finished an explosive course at Camp X. That's me, of course.
The best and the brightest of the world trained at Camp X.
And they're all nationalities. That fellow's Jewish, and that fellow's Jewish. He's Polish, and these two are Americans.
These people became World War II saboteurs, assassins, frogmen, and intelligence gatherers.
They weren't just picked off the street. They were hand-picked for one reason or another. Everybody had some claim to fame.
Chosen by William S. Stevenson, a man from Winnipeg with the code name Intrepid. Stevenson led the spy service, BSC, acting on orders from Winston Churchill.
There was always explosions and gunfire at the time.
Locals were told it was a regular Army training base, but it was nothing of the sort.
I wasn't involved much in the water part of it, but there was a lot of experimenting going on with, you'd call it a version of what they'd call the Navy SEALs now, where a good swimmer could go underwater, swim underwater undetected, and plant an explosive on the hull of a ship.
The agents at Camp X were some of the first to get trained in plastic explosives. They learned self-defense, how to kill someone silently, how to resist torture, anything that increased an agent's chance of survival after parachuting in behind enemy lines.
It took quite a bit of training not to jump at a gunshot. We were lined up in groups, and the instructor would take a Colt 45, which is a big bullet and very noisy, and shoot a live round between the rows, so it would go by two people's ears, you see.
And what does that sound like?
Hard to describe. Sounded like an angry bee, the bullet going by. The bang from the gun was, well, you lost your hearing for a little bit. But anyway, it kept a lot of us alive. As they told us, they might not be shooting at you. So if you jumped and gave your position away, if you were hiding, maybe they weren't shooting at you. As it turned out, in my case, it was always true. They weren't shooting at me, they were shooting at somebody else.
But there wasn't always a trial run.
I made 3 drops myself from an aircraft, and the only training you got before that, the old barn on the farm at Camp X, you jumps out of the loft and let the harness tighten to give you an idea of what it felt like when the chute opened. Well, of course, once you jump out, you're committed. You can't change your mind. And I tell you one thing, you'll never find me skydiving for fun. The guy behind you would push you out. You would. I don't know what would happen to the last fellow if he decided to stay. I don't think anybody ever stayed. Anyway, as I said, we did things. Being scared half the time kept you alive.
Before going on these missions, Cliff was given a piece of paper with a phone number on it, his only contact.
You were to read it, and under supervision, you either flushed it or ate it. I probably can't remember what I had for breakfast, but I can remember every phone number, every number I had to remember. You bloody well better remember them, because it kept you alive.
Did you have to kill anybody?
That's mission talk. We don't talk about that.
Cliff and the other agents were Britain's eyes and ears during the war. They reported troop, ship, and sub movements, where munitions factories were, even chit-chat in the local pubs. The agents in the field were transmitting and receiving on equipment squeezed into a suitcase.
They had them down about the size of an overnight bag, about 16 inches, 4 inches deep, and about 12 inches high. So they're chunky to carry, because there was 2 large batteries in that, and very easily detected. You couldn't really hide them anywhere.
Eventually, most agents got in a tight spot and had to abandon their equipment. It was either their equipment or them. Sometimes it was both.
Sending with a hand key, everybody had a different rhythm, not speed, but a different rhythm. It was like an accent on your voice, and you knew if it was that person. You knew it was the person you were talking to just by after exchanging greetings. You knew who you had.
And you knew if it wasn't them.